The first sound was the strike of hooves against frozen earth. Then came the cry of a horse, sharp and terrified, followed by the splintering crash of a carriage wheel giving way. The night was black as ink, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound, until a woman's voice cut through it, steady despite the chaos. "Hold the reins," she said. "Hold them, for heaven's sake." The horses lurched, the coach rocked violently, and then, as if the world had taken a single deep breath, all was still again. Isolde Merenwood sat perfectly motionless, her gloved hands gripping the edge of the seat. Outside, snow fell thickly, coating the wrecked wheel, the road, the driver's fallen whip. She could smell iron, cold, and fear. Yet even in that instant of peril, her mind was clear. She thought, almost calmly, that she was very near Thornridge Hall, and that this might be an omen. When the coachman confirmed that one wheel was shattered and they must continue on foot, she merely nodded. "Then we walk," she said, lifting her lantern and stepping into the snow. It was the night that began everything, though the story had started long before that. 2 days earlier she had stood in the modest parsonage where she was born, staring at the letter that had changed her fate. The seal was black wax, the handwriting austere. The Duke of Harmsworth required a governess for his 2 children. The salary was double what any sensible household might offer. Her father, the Reverend Merenwood, had frowned at the words but said nothing until she folded the letter. "You are determined," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "Determination is all I have left." What she did not tell him was that she carried a wound of her own, a broken engagement to a man who had chosen wealth over loyalty. She had learned that security could be taken as swiftly as affection, and that work was the only safe devotion. When the offer came, she accepted without hesitation. Now, as the long iron gates of Thornridge Hall loomed out of the fog, she wondered if determination would be enough. The lantern light trembled across the frost-coated metal. Beyond lay the estate, a silhouette of turrets and chimneys, like the ruins of some ancient fortress. The coachman hesitated. "Are you certain, miss? They say no governess lasts a fortnight there." Isolde lifted her chin. "Then I shall be the first who does." She pressed the gate herself, and its groan echoed through the emptiness. A servant awaited her in the vestibule, a narrow-faced man whose eyes avoided hers. He led her through vast corridors that smelled of beeswax and disuse. Paintings hung in dim light, the eyes of forgotten ancestors watching her progress. The air was so cold she could see her breath. Somewhere, faintly, a clock struck 9. The servant stopped before a heavy oak door and murmured, "His Grace will see you now." Isolde drew a slow breath and stepped inside. He was standing by the fire, though the blaze gave no warmth. The Duke of Harmsworth was taller than she expected, his shoulders broad beneath black cloth. A scar traced from his left temple to the corner of his jaw, pale against tanned skin. Yet it was his eyes that startled her, dark, intelligent, and exhausted, as though they had forgotten how to hope. "Miss Merenwood," he said. His voice carried the precision of command. She curtsied. "Your Grace." He studied her a moment. "You came despite the warnings." "I did." "And why is that?" She met his gaze steadily. "Because even wild children deserve a chance to be tamed with kindness." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps irritation, but he only said, "We shall see. The housekeeper will show you to your room." Her chamber lay in the east wing, overlooking gardens lost to neglect. She unpacked her few possessions, a worn Bible, a small notebook, a miniature portrait of her late mother. When she drew back the curtain, she saw the faint outline of a fountain buried under ice. The wind moaned against the glass, and she felt, for the first time, a whisper of fear. It was not the fear of ghosts, nor of the Duke's rumoured temper, but of what might awaken in her own heart if she lingered here too long. Still, she had come to work, not to dream. The next morning brought a thin winter sun and her first sight of the children. She found them in what must once have been a morning room. The boy, Henry, was balanced upon a sofa brandishing a wooden sword. The girl, Sophie, was attempting to tie a footman to a chair with drapery cord. The footman, mortified, looked at Isolde as if begging for rescue. "Pirates," Henry announced. "You are our prisoner." Isolde regarded them calmly. "How fortunate," she replied. "I was once captured by pirates myself. That silenced them." Henry frowned. "You were not." "I was," she said gravely. "Off the coast of Cornwall. They made me walk the plank." Sophie's eyes widened. "Did you drown?" "Obviously not," Isolde said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I made them a bargain. I told them I knew where treasure was hidden, but I would reveal it only if they made me their captain." "And did they?" "Indeed. And do you know what I did?" The children shook their heads. I sailed them home, and each pirate was given a fair trial and a second chance. She paused, her tone softening. The greatest treasure is not gold, Henry, but knowing who you are beneath the disguise. The room fell silent. Henry climbed down. Sophie untied the footman. In that instant, the fortress of their defiance cracked. That evening, the housekeeper appeared to announce that the Duke wished to see her. She entered his study as dusk gathered beyond the windows. He did not rise when she curtsied. "You have survived your first day," he said dryly. "That alone distinguishes you." "Your children are spirited," she answered, "but not ill-natured." His brow lifted. "You presume to understand them already?" "Only that grief disguises itself as mischief, Your Grace. I lost my mother at their age. I remember the impulse to break something simply to be noticed." He was silent so long she wondered if she had gone too far. Then quietly he said, "You are either very brave, Miss Merenwood, or very foolish. I have not decided which." She inclined her head. "Perhaps both." When she left, he spoke again, his voice lower, almost thoughtful. "The vase they shattered belonged to my wife. It was the last gift she received." She turned at the door. "Some broken things can be mended, Your Grace, if one is patient." He did not answer, but when she glanced back, she thought she saw his hand tighten on the arm of his chair, as if holding fast to something unseen. That night, as she lay awake, the wind rose, carrying with it a sound like faint music. Somewhere in the great house, a piano was being played soft, mournful, and beautiful. She listened until the melody faded, and when sleep came, it brought a dream of lanterns flickering among snow-covered roses. She could not know then that the melody would return, nor that it would lead her into the heart of the Duke's forgotten vow, the promise buried beneath years of silence. If you wish to continue, subscribe and tell me in the comments which part of Isolde's arrival intrigued you most. In the next part, the wild airs of Thornridge will reveal the first secret of the house. The following morning, the frost had deepened, turning the gardens of Thornridge Hall into a world of glass. From her window, Isolde Merenwood watched the pale sun rise behind the bare oaks. The silence was immense, broken only by the caw of distant crows. The beauty of it was cold, almost cruel, and she thought that perhaps it suited this house, where grief had hardened into habit. She dressed in her plain grey gown and went in search of her pupils. The sound of laughter led her to the long gallery. At first it seemed innocent, the sort of laughter children share in secret. Then she saw the cause of it. Henry and Sophie had overturned an inkpot upon the polished floor, and with solemn concentration were drawing enormous circles with their bare feet. The black stains trailed behind them like dark comets. When they saw her, they froze, waiting for the inevitable reprimand. Isolde simply regarded the scene, then reached for a handkerchief and knelt. "If we must paint," she said quietly, "let us at least make something worth keeping." The children stared as she dipped her own finger into the ink and drew a careful curve. "There," she murmured, "the beginning of a storm." Henry blinked, unsure whether she mocked him or joined him. "You are not angry?" "I am far too tired to waste anger on spilled ink," she said, her tone light. "But when we are done, you will help me clean this floor until it shines." Sophie giggled. "Even captains scrub their decks," Isolde added, and for the first time the girl laughed without defiance. The housekeeper appeared later, scandalized. "Miss Merenwood, you indulged them far too freely." Isolde only smiled. "I would rather guide a wild heart than mend a broken one." The woman's expression softened for an instant before she remembered herself. "His Grace expects discipline, and he shall have it," Isolde replied gently, though not always in the form he recognizes. In the afternoon, she found the children in the nursery, engaged in a furious quarrel over a toy soldier. Henry's voice was sharp, Sophie's trembling. Isolde stood in the doorway until they noticed her. "A battle again?" she asked. Henry's chin lifted. "He is the general, and she disobeyed." "And what punishment does the general command?" "Banishment," Henry said grandly. "Then you will be lonely," Isolde answered. "A general without an army rules nothing but silence." The boy frowned. "You speak as if I am wrong. I speak as one who has known banishment." She turned away to the window, where the light was fading. "My father once sent me away from home for a choice he could not approve. It is a cold thing, Henry, to be cast out for disobedience." The children watched her quietly, sensing something in her tone that was not instruction but memory. At last Sophie whispered, "What did you do?" Isolde smiled without mirth. "I loved someone my father did not." She left them to consider that. After supper, the Duke's voice summoned her again. She found him in the library, standing beside the great window that overlooked the frozen lawns. "Mrs. Doran tells me the children have not been entirely unmanageable," he said. "A cautious compliment," Isolde observed. "She also says you allowed them to stain the gallery with ink. We have already cleaned it." "That is not the point." "Then what is, Your Grace?" He turned toward her. The lamplight caught the scar along his cheek. "They require order. They have lived too long in chaos." "They require affection," she replied softly. "Order without affection breeds obedience, not goodness." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he asked, almost as if to himself, "Were you ever a mother, Miss Merenwood?" The question startled her. "No, Your Grace." "Then you speak with remarkable certainty about what children need." "Because I was one once," she said. "A lonely one." Something in her words seemed to pierce him. He looked away, his hand tightening on the curtain cord. "You may go," he said at last. But as she turned, he added quietly, "The morning lessons begin at 9. Be punctual." It was not a dismissal, but neither was it approval. Still, she left the room with an odd sense that a line had been crossed, though she could not tell on which side either of them now stood. The days passed in cautious truce. Isolde established a rhythm of lessons and walks. Henry's quick mind took to arithmetic and history with surprising vigor, though he masked it behind careless laughter. Sophie proved gifted with drawing, her small sketches of birds and flowers scattered across the table like fragile secrets. They began to tell her things, small things, but precious. That their mother had loved music, that their father never smiled, that sometimes they heard him late at night in the music room, playing until dawn. Isolde listened without interruption, filing each fragment away like pieces of a puzzle whose picture she had yet to see. One evening, when she entered the schoolroom to extinguish the lamps, she found Sophie sitting by the fire, whispering to a doll dressed in scraps of lace. The child looked up with solemn eyes. "Do you believe people watch us after they die?" Isolde considered before answering. "I think those who love us stay near, though we cannot see them." Sophie nodded. "Then Mama is here. I talk to her so she will not be lonely." The words tightened Isolde's throat. "That is a kind thing to do," she said softly. "Perhaps she listens to every word." Henry, half asleep on the sofa, murmured, "If she listens, why does Father never speak to her?" Isolde smoothed the boy's hair. "Perhaps he does, Henry. Perhaps he speaks through silence." The answer satisfied neither of them, but they accepted it. Later, as Isolde crossed the corridor to her room, she heard faint strains of piano music again. The melody wound through the air like a sigh. She paused at the door of the music room, the handle cold under her fingers. Through the crack she saw the Duke seated at the instrument, his head bowed. His hands moved slowly, hesitantly, as if memory itself pained him. She did not enter. Some griefs, she knew, must be witnessed from a distance. She turned away, carrying the melody with her into the dark. The following morning, the housekeeper found the ink-stained rags in the servants' quarters and scolded the maids for carelessness. Isolde intervened, accepting blame herself. The woman frowned. "You protect them too much." "I protect what may yet grow," Isolde said. "Even weeds can become gardens if tended." That afternoon, when Henry presented her with a folded paper covered in neat sums, she smiled and said nothing of praise. The boy's ears reddened as if he had received a medal. Progress, she thought, was rarely loud. In the stillness of that evening, she wrote a short note in her journal. "The children are wounded mirrors of their father. To heal them, one must understand what broke him." The ink blurred slightly where her pen trembled, and for the first time she wondered if her own heart was as safe as she had believed. Snow fell again that night, soft as dust upon the stone terraces of Thornridge Hall. When Isolde Merenwood rose the next morning, the world outside her window had turned to white silence. The storm had buried every path, and the horizon was lost in pale mist. The house seemed even larger in such weather, each corridor echoing her footsteps as if she walked through the ribs of a sleeping creature. The children's laughter, once defiant, now rang faintly from the nursery. Something in the air had shifted, less rebellion, more restraint, but she could not tell whether it was progress or weariness. Breakfast passed in uneasy quiet. The Duke did not appear, as usual. Henry attempted to feed crumbs to a sparrow perched on the windowsill, and Sophie hummed the tune their father played at night. Isolde said nothing. When the meal ended, she dismissed them for their lessons and went to the library to return a volume she had borrowed. She did not expect to find the Duke there. He was standing by the hearth, a letter in his hand, his expression unreadable. The light from the tall windows caught the frost clinging to his coat. He must have come in from the stables. "Miss Marenwood," he said without preamble, "I trust the children have not yet driven you to resignation." "Not yet, Your Grace," she replied, "though they do test the limits of invention." He looked up, a glimmer of amusement or perhaps fatigue crossing his face. "You sound as though you consider them a puzzle." "All children are puzzles," she said. "So are their parents." His eyes sharpened at that, and she feared she had gone too far. But instead of rebuke, he said quietly, "Do you presume to study me as well?" "I study everything within my care," she answered. "That includes what influences the children most." "And you think that is me?" "I think they live within the shadow you cast, Your Grace." He said nothing for a long time. The fire popped softly, a piece of coal collapsing into ash. Then he folded the letter with careful precision and placed it upon the mantel. "You are frank, Miss Marenwood. It is easier than pretense." "Pretense," he repeated. "That word has defined this house for 2 years." His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of confession. "The day my wife died, Thornridge became a theatre. The children pretend they are brave. The servants pretend not to see my grief, and I pretend to lead a household rather than a ruin." His gaze drifted toward the window. "You are the first person to speak here without pretending." Isolde lowered her eyes. "Perhaps that is why you hired me." "Perhaps," he said, though the word sounded more like doubt than agreement. He turned away, but before she could leave, he asked suddenly, "Do you believe the dead forgive us?" The question startled her. "I would like to think they do," she said after a moment. "Otherwise the living would never know peace." His hand closed upon the back of the chair. "Peace," he murmured, a word my wife used often, and one she never found. Then, almost to himself, "I promised her something once. A vow I failed to keep." The silence that followed felt like a door left ajar between two strangers. Isolde did not ask what he had promised. The pain in his voice was answer enough. Instead, she said softly, "Promises, like people, can be remade." His eyes met hers, dark and searching, as though he wished to believe her but could not. "You speak as if you know." "I speak as one who has broken vows of her own." He did not press her further, and she left before the conversation could wound them both. That evening, while teaching the children geography, Isolde noticed that Henry's usual mischief had dulled. He traced the outlines of the map absently, his thoughts elsewhere. "What troubles you?" she asked. "Father says Mama is gone because of him," Henry whispered. Sophie's head snapped up. "He did not mean it," she protested, her voice trembling. "He says it in the night when he thinks we are asleep." Henry's eyes filled with something far older than his years. "He was riding with her when the horse fell. He says he pulled the reins too hard." Isolde's heart clenched. "Sometimes people blame themselves because it is easier than blaming fate," she said gently. "But what happened was not his choosing." "He does not believe that," Henry muttered. Sophie clung to her doll as if it might hold back tears. Isolde gathered them both close. "Listen to me. No one's heart breaks alone. When your father hurts, you feel it. That is how families are bound. But healing works the same way. When one begins to mend, the others do too." She looked from one child to the other. "Will you help me show him that?" Henry nodded uncertainly. Sophie whispered, "How?" "By being yourselves again. Laugh when you wish to laugh. Speak kindly even when he cannot. Remind him that love did not die with your mother." That night, after the children slept, Isolde wrote by candlelight. "The Duke carries guilt like armor," she penned. "If it is ever removed, it will not be by force but by the gentle persistence of those who love him." She paused, staring at the flame. The words felt dangerous, not because they were untrue, but because they revealed too much of her own heart. The next morning brought an unexpected thaw. The ice on the windows melted into rivulets, and the world outside gleamed. The Duke joined them for breakfast for the first time since her arrival. The children sat straighter, uncertain how to behave. He greeted them with a brief nod. When Sophie offered him a drawing of the sunrise, he hesitated, then took it. "You drew this?" She nodded. "It is the garden, when the frost melts." He studied the simple lines, the delicate color of the sky. "Your mother would have liked it," he said quietly. Sophie's eyes brightened. Henry looked at Isolde, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A small victory, perhaps, but real. After breakfast, the Duke excused himself. Isolde watched him leave, the morning light falling across his scarred face. Something within her stirred a compassion she had not expected, mingled with a fear she dared not name. She told herself it was only sympathy, the natural pity of one soul for another. But deep inside she knew it was more than that, and that this knowledge would not be easily forgotten. That night, A strange sound woke Isolde Merenwood. At first she thought it was the wind scraping the shutters, but as she listened, she realized it was music low, distant and sorrowful. The melody drifted through the corridors like a wandering spirit. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and followed the sound through the dimly lit hall. The moonlight came through high windows, silvering the marble floor. The music grew clearer as she neared the west wing, a tune both haunting and tender. Then it stopped. The silence that followed felt like the pause between heartbeats. She waited, but no sound came again. When she returned to her room, the air seemed colder, as if the house itself had been listening. The next morning, the household carried on as though nothing had happened. The servants moved quietly, their faces expressionless. Yet Isolde sensed that something unspoken linked them all, an invisible thread of fear or reverence. When she asked Mrs. Doran, the housekeeper, about the music, the woman's mouth tightened. "You heard it?" "Yes," Isolde said. "Who plays at such an hour?" "No one," the housekeeper replied. "That piano has been closed since the Duchess died. His Grace forbade it to be touched." "But I heard it," Isolde insisted. "Then it was the wind," Mrs. Doran said briskly. "This house is full of echoes. Best not to listen too closely." She turned away, ending the conversation. That afternoon, during the children's reading lesson, Sophie suddenly whispered, "You heard Mamma's song." Isolde froze. "What do you mean?" "The song that plays at night," the girl said. "I told Henry, but he says it is ghosts. It is not. It is Mamma reminding us she still loves us." Henry looked embarrassed. "Sophie dreams things." "I did not dream," Sophie protested, her eyes wide. "The night before Christmas it played, and I saw light under Father's door." Isolde's hand trembled slightly as she turned the page of the book. "It is a beautiful thought, Sophie," she said gently, "and perhaps you are right. Love sometimes lingers in strange ways." The girl seemed comforted, though Henry's frown deepened. Isolde wondered if the Duke had broken his own commandment and played the piano himself, a man too proud to grieve in daylight. Later that week, she ventured into the West Wing. The corridor was colder there, the walls lined with portraits darkened by age. The last door opened into the music room. Dust lay thick upon the keys of the grand piano, yet the stool was drawn out, and there were faint marks upon the floor, as if someone had stood there recently. She touched one of the keys, and the soft note echoed like a sigh. "Forgive me," she murmured, not knowing to whom she spoke, and closed the lid again. As she turned to leave, her gaze caught the edge of a large painting covered by a crimson cloth. It hung above the mantel, too heavy for dust to gather on its folds. The fabric was held by pins at each corner, as though someone had once tried to hide it in haste. Against her better judgment, Isolde reached up and lifted the lower edge. The painting beneath was of a woman young, golden-haired, serene. The eyes were kind but sad, and the likeness to Sophie was undeniable. The Duchess Evelyn Arden. The brushwork was masterful, capturing a delicate balance between strength and gentleness. Beneath the portrait, a small brass plate bore an inscription: "To my heart's peace, now and forever." Isolde felt an ache deep within her chest, as if the air had turned heavy. She let the cloth fall back and left the room in silence. That evening, while helping Sophie with her drawing, Isolde noticed the girl sketching flowers unfamiliar to her. "What are those?" she asked. "Mamma's orchids," Sophie said. "She grew them in the glass house by the lake, but they all died." "Why?" "Father locked the place after she fell." "Fell?" Isolde asked softly. "From her horse. They said she broke her neck, but Henry says there was blood on Father's coat when he came home." Henry glared at her. "Do not say that, Sophie." The girl bit her lip and looked down. Isolde placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes accidents leave marks that are not ours to question," she said. "We must wait until the truth wishes to be found." Code. When the children went to bed, Isolde stood by the window of the schoolroom, looking toward the grounds. The moon shone on the frozen lake, and beyond it, she saw the faint outline of a structure, glass walls glimmering faintly, the old conservatory. She remembered the child's words and the portrait's hidden face. The house was full of silence, but beneath it, she sensed voices waiting to be heard. She wondered what vow had bound the Duke to such grief, and whether that vow was the same one that chained the entire household to sorrow. The next day, a storm swept across the moors. The Duke did not appear until evening. When he did, Isolde noticed mud on his boots, and a weariness that looked older than the day itself. He found her in the library, arranging books for the children. "Miss Merenwood," he said, his voice unusually low, I am told you ventured into the West Wing. I did, she admitted. It was unwise. Perhaps, yet curiosity is often wiser than obedience. His gaze rested on her face. Did you look behind the cloth? She hesitated, then nodded. I did not mean to offend. You did not, he said, surprising her. But you must understand some memories demand darkness. And yet darkness cannot preserve them forever, she replied quietly. Light always finds its way through cloth. For a moment he said nothing, then he turned toward the fire. My wife loved that room, he said almost to himself. She played there every morning. I could not bear to hear the piano after she was gone. I thought silence would be mercy. I was wrong. It only changed the sound of grief. He looked at her then, the distance between them narrowing like a breath drawn too close. Tell me, Miss Merenwood, do you believe the living owe the dead remembrance or release? She met his eyes. Both, Your Grace. We honor them by remembering who they were, and we release them by living as they would have wished. His expression softened, but the sadness did not leave it. You speak as though you knew her. I only know loss, Isolde said. It speaks the same language in every house. When she retired that night, she thought of the crimson cloth, the orchids by the lake, and the melody that had haunted the halls. She knew now that Thornridge Hall was not cursed but waiting to be forgiven, perhaps, or simply to be heard. And she wondered, as she extinguished her candle, what other secrets whispered in its silence, longing for the courage of daylight. The morning after the storm, a fragile sunlight touched the gardens of Thornridge Hall. The snow had melted in uneven patches, revealing black earth beneath. Isolde Merenwood watched from the window as mist drifted low across the lake. It seemed impossible that such quiet could exist after so many nights of restless music and whispering shadows. When she turned from the glass, she found Henry and Sophie waiting in the doorway, both still in their nightclothes, their cheeks flushed from excitement. Miss Merenwood, Henry said breathlessly, we want to show you something. Sophie tugged at his sleeve. You promised we would wait until the sun came out. It has, he replied. Look, she is awake. Isolde smiled at their urgency. Then I suppose I must follow. They ran ahead, barefoot and laughing, while she wrapped herself in a shawl and took up her lantern though the morning was bright. The children led her through the side corridor, down a narrow stair that smelled of damp stone, and out onto the path behind the house. The ground was soft with thawing frost. They passed the stables, the orchard, and then descended toward the lake. Beyond the reeds stood the conservatory she had glimpsed from the window, a long glass building half consumed by ivy. The panes were streaked with grime, the roof sagging in places, yet when the light struck it, it glimmered faintly, like a dream refusing to die. This was Mamma's place, Sophie whispered. No one comes here anymore. Henry kicked a stone. Father said it is dangerous. Then we shall be careful, Isolde said, lifting the latch. The door creaked open, releasing a breath of air heavy with dust and forgotten fragrance. Inside, the warmth was faint but real, trapped sunlight lingering among the broken glass. Rusted watering cans lay overturned, dry vines curled around the pillars, and yet in one corner, beneath a veil of dust, a few orchids still lived small, pale, improbably alive. Sophie knelt beside them with reverence. They bloom every winter, she said. Just a few, even though no one waters them. Mamma said they were magic. Isolde crouched and touched the fragile petals. Perhaps they are kept alive by memory, she murmured, or by promises not yet broken. Henry frowned. What promises? She did not answer. Her gaze had fallen on a small wooden table near the wall. Upon it lay a tarnished watering can, a cracked cup, and a book with a faded blue cover. She brushed away the dust. The initials EA were engraved upon the front. Evelyn Arden, she said softly. The children watched as she opened it. The first page bore a date written in graceful script. April the 10th, 1869. The pages were filled with notes about plants, sketches of flowers, and lines written like confessions. She read a few aloud. Lucien says I worry too much. He does not understand that love, like a garden, dies without care. I have made him promise to keep this place alive even when I am gone. He laughed at me, but he promised. Isolde turned another page. If he forgets, I shall remind him with white orchids. They will bloom for him as long as love remembers. She closed the book carefully. The children stared at her. What does it mean? Henry asked. It means your mother believed in vows, she said quietly, and she feared that time might make him forget. Sophie touched one of the orchids. Then this is her reminder. Perhaps it is, Isolde said. She placed the book inside her shawl. We must keep it safe. Henry looked uncertain. If father finds out, he will be angry. Not forever, Isolde replied. Sometimes anger is only sorrow that has forgotten its name. They walked back to the house in silence. The sky had cleared entirely now, pale blue reflected in the lake. As they climbed the steps, Sophie asked, "Will you tell father?" "Not yet," Isolde said. "Some truths must wait until the heart is ready to hear them." That evening she opened the journal again in her room. She read until the candle guttered low. The later pages changed in tone. The handwriting grew hurried, restless. "He rides too often, too recklessly. I fear the Moors call to him more than I do. If anything should happen, I pray he will forgive me for not being stronger." The final entry ended abruptly, the ink blotted as though the pen had been snatched away. Isolde closed the book and sat very still. The air in the room felt heavy, filled with the weight of a woman's unspoken fear. She thought of the Duke's scar, the silence that clung to him, and the piano's mournful notes. There were stories he could not tell, and wounds he had never allowed to bleed. The next morning, the Duke summoned her to his study. He stood by the window, a letter half folded in his hand. "Mrs. Doran informs me that you took the children beyond the grounds yesterday," he said. "I did, Your Grace. To the conservatory." "Yes." "You were not forbidden?" "No one told me otherwise." His brow furrowed. "And what did you find?" She hesitated. "Remnants of beauty, orchids still living, against all reason." He turned sharply. "You should not have gone." "Why not?" she asked quietly. "Because it is a place for the dead," he said. "Because I cannot bear it." The force in his voice made her flinch. He saw it and turned away. "Forgive me. I did not mean—" "I understand," she said softly. "But even the dead wish to be remembered kindly." He looked at her then, weary and unguarded. "You do not know what you ask." "Perhaps not. But I have seen your children trying to love you through silence. They are braver than they know." For a long time, he said nothing. Then he murmured, "You are too bold for this house, Miss Merenwood. And yet I am still here." "Yes," he said almost to himself, "still here." That night, the piano did not play, but when Isolde passed the music room, she saw a faint light beneath the door. She paused, listening. No melody came, only the faint rustle of paper, like pages being turned. She wondered if he had found the journal, or if he was merely searching for something else that could not be named. The orchids by the lake had begun to bloom again. Somewhere deep in Thornridge Hall, the vow that love had forgotten began quietly to breathe. The invitation arrived 2 mornings later, carried by a footman in livery, still damp from travel. The Duke of Harmsworth broke the seal himself, his expression unreadable as he scanned the page. When he finished, he said only, "The annual winter ball will be held here, at Thornridge." The word startled the household. Even the servants, who had long learned not to show curiosity, exchanged glances. No ball had been hosted since the Duchess's death. For 2 years the chandeliers had hung dark, the ballroom locked, its mirrors covered in linen. Now, suddenly, the Duke was reopening the house to the county families who had whispered of his isolation and his sorrow. The news spread swiftly. For days the quiet halls filled with unfamiliar noise, the scurry of maids polishing floors, the thud of hammers repairing banisters, the scent of beeswax and holly. Isolde Merenwood watched the transformation with uneasy fascination. It was as if the house itself, long asleep beneath snow, had been shaken awake. She oversaw the children's lessons in the mornings and their dancing practice in the afternoons. Henry resisted, embarrassed by the thought of public display. Sophie, however, delighted in every turn and curtsy. "Will father dance?" she asked one day as Isolde corrected her steps. "He has not since—" The child stopped, biting her lip. "Since Mamma," Isolde answered gently. "Perhaps he will, if the music is kind." Cosy. That evening, as she reviewed the guest list in the library, the Duke entered without warning. "You seem industrious," he said. She looked up. "The children will attend?" "Briefly," he said. "They must be seen, if only to quiet gossip. And yourself, Your Grace? Must you be seen as well?" His mouth curved faintly. "That is the purpose of such events, to be watched and judged." "Then I hope you are ready for both." Her tone was light, but he caught the underlying concern. "You think I am not?" "I think the world expects you to pretend you have forgotten," she said quietly, "when you never will." His gaze held hers for a moment too long. "You have an unfortunate habit of being right." "And you of proving it," she replied, earning the briefest ghost of a smile before he turned away. On the day of the ball, the sky hung low with snow, the kind that threatened but never fell. Carriages rolled through the gates, wheels crunching over gravel. By dusk, the ballroom blazed with light. Musicians tuned their instruments. Servants arranged flowers and candles along the walls. The chandeliers glittered, and the mirrors reflected the brightness so fiercely that Isolde felt almost blinded. She stood at the edge of the room, dressed simply in grey silk, watching the guests arrive, lords and ladies in rich colours, jewels flashing at their throats, eyes sharp with curiosity. They greeted the Duke with cautious courtesy, their smiles polished like their boots. Henry and Sophie appeared beside her, transformed in miniature finery. "Do we look proper?" Sophie whispered. "You look splendid," Isolde said. "Remember to bow, Henry, not glare." "I do not glare," he muttered. "You do," she said kindly, straightening his collar. The orchestra struck its first note, and conversation swelled like a tide. When the Duke entered, the murmur of voices shifted. He wore black evening dress, his scar catching the light, but not diminishing his presence. People parted for him instinctively. He greeted his guests with practiced ease, but Isolde, watching from a distance, saw the tension in his shoulders. His smile was precise, his words courteous, yet his eyes searched the crowd as if for escape. Halfway through the evening, Lady Celeste Montrose approached him, tall, elegant, and draped in burgundy silk. She had the poise of one who knew her beauty and its worth. "Your Grace," she said sweetly, "how good to see Thornridge alive again. We have all missed your company." "You flatter me, Lady Celeste." "Not at all. Grief is a heavy garment, but even mourning must end. I am glad you have found the strength to entertain again." Her gaze flicked briefly toward Isolde, standing near the wall with the children. "And such charming company you keep these days." "My governess," the Duke said evenly. "She instructs my children." "Of course," Lady Celeste murmured. "Such devotion is rare." Her smile did not reach her eyes. Later, as the orchestra began a new waltz, Lady Celeste leaned close and said in a voice meant to carry, "It is generous of you to display the children after their mischief of the past years. 7 governesses, was it? One might think the little ones untamable." The words froze the air around them. Guests turned their heads, sensing scandal. Henry stiffened. Sophie clutched Isolde's hand. The Duke's expression hardened, but before he could speak, Isolde stepped forward. "Forgive me, Lady Celeste," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "Children who have lost their mother and nearly their father require patience, not gossip. If mischief is the price of grief, it is a small one to pay." The ballroom fell silent. The lady's painted lips parted in outrage. "You presume much for a servant." "I presume only compassion," Isolde said. "It is the rarest courtesy here tonight." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. The Duke's voice cut through them, low and steady. "Miss Marenwood is correct." Every eye turned to him. "My children have suffered more than most adults here could bear. If their mischief offends you, you may find the door." The colour drained from Lady Celeste's face. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, awkwardly, the music began again. The crowd resumed their conversations, quieter now, their curiosity sharpened by discomfort. The Duke turned to Isolde. "You should not have spoken," he said under his breath. "And yet you are not angry." "No," he admitted, only astonished. He looked toward the children who clung to each other. "You defended them better than I ever have." "They needed to see someone do it," she replied. "They needed to know love does not hide when watched." Comtesse, when the ball ended, the guests departed under a sky that had finally begun to snow. Thornridge Hall fell silent once more, though its silence now seemed gentler. The Duke stood at the doorway, watching the last carriage vanish. Isolde joined him, her shawl drawn close. "You have done more than open your doors tonight," she said softly. "You have opened your heart a little." He glanced at her, the faintest smile crossing his tired face. "Be careful, Miss Marenwood. You make dangerous observations." "I have no wish to be safe," she answered. "Not if truth lives elsewhere." Inside, the children waited at the foot of the stairs. Sophie's eyes shone. "You were brave," she told Isolde. "So were you," Isolde said, touching her cheek. Henry looked at his father. "You are not angry with her?" The Duke rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, Henry, I am proud." It was the first time those words had ever been spoken in that house. The morning after the ball dawned with a light snowfall, soft and hesitant, as though the sky were uncertain whether to let go. The servants moved quietly, their faces still carrying the astonishment of the previous night. No one had expected the Duke of Harmsworth to defend his children so openly, nor to dismiss Lady Celeste Montrose from his home. Yet the echo of his words lingered in every corridor. Isolde Merenwood felt it too, a change in the air, delicate but profound, as if the great house had drawn its first free breath in years. When she entered the nursery, she found Henry and Sophie sitting side by side at the window, watching flakes drift past the glass. "Do people hate us now?" Sophie asked suddenly. Henry scowled at her question, but his gaze betrayed the same worry. Isolde knelt beside them. "People do not hate you," she said. "They only fear what they do not understand. But last night, your father showed them courage, and courage changes fear." Henry studied her. "He has never talked to them like that before." "Then perhaps he has learned that silence does not protect the ones we love," she said gently. Sophie leaned against her shoulder. "You made him different." Isolde smiled faintly. "No, my dear, you did. He only needed to remember how much he loves you." Later that day, the Duke summoned her to his study. She found him standing near the fire, his expression grave yet calmer than she had ever seen it. "You have caused quite a stir, Miss Merenwood," he said. "So I have been told. Several guests left before supper. I imagine the county will dine on our scandal for weeks." "Then let them eat well," she said, unable to hide a smile. His eyes glimmered briefly, then softened. "You are not afraid of me, are you?" "Should I be? Most people are. I have learned that fear is rarely useful." He regarded her for a long moment, and then said quietly, "You remind me of Evelyn, not in face or manner, but in spirit. She would have spoken as you did." Isolde felt her breath catch. "Your wife must have been very brave." "She was," he said, his voice low, "and I failed her." He turned away from the fire, looking toward the tall windows where snow still fell. "We quarreled that morning. I told her the mare was unfit to ride, but she laughed at me. I followed her, shouted after her across the moor. The horse stumbled. I reached for the reins, too late. I can still hear her scream. The words broke from him like stones striking glass. He pressed a hand to his scar. They say it was an accident, but I know better. My pride killed her." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Then Isolde said, "It was not pride that killed her, Your Grace. It was the cruel chance that lives in every moment of love. You tried to save her." "I did not save her," he said harshly. "She trusted me and I failed." "Then trust yourself now," she replied. "Trust that she would forgive you." He looked at her with eyes dark as midnight. "And if she cannot, then you must forgive yourself in her place." Something in her tone, calm and unwavering, seemed to steady him. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of held breath. "You speak as though forgiveness were simple." "It is not simple," she said. "It is necessary." Quote. He turned back to the fire, and for a long while they stood in silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I have been told you took the children to the conservatory." "Yes." "You found the orchids?" "I did." "And her book?" She hesitated. "Yes, Your Grace." "It was meant for me," he said. "I gave her that journal on our first anniversary. I thought she used it for her flowers. I did not know she wrote of me." He paused, the faintest tremor in his voice. "You read her words?" "Some. Then you know she feared I would forget." "And you did not?" "I tried to," he said. "That was my sin." He turned then, and the distance between them felt smaller than it should. "You said last night that love does not hide when watched. You were right. I have hidden everything that once made me human." His gaze held hers, searching, almost pleading. "Tell me, Miss Merenwood, what would you have me do?" She met his eyes steadily. "Live, Your Grace, not as a man haunted by loss, but as one still capable of joy." He studied her for a long moment, and then said softly, "You believe joy can return to a place like this?" "Yes," she said, "because I have seen it in your children, because I have felt it here, when they laugh. You need only listen." His eyes did not leave her face. "You are a remarkable woman. I am merely persistent." "Persistence can heal more than faith," he said. The words held a warmth she had never heard from him before. When she left the study, she found the corridor filled with pale light. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the world white and still. The silence of Thornridge no longer felt oppressive but waiting, as though something fragile had begun to stir. She passed the music room and noticed the door slightly open. Inside, the piano stood uncovered. One handprint marked the dust on the lid. That evening, as twilight deepened, she heard the sound of music once more. Not the mournful tune that had haunted the nights, but something gentler, a melody uncertain at first, then growing clearer. She rose from her chair and went to the landing, listening. The notes rose through the house, hesitant and beautiful, like a soul remembering how to breathe. When the last chord faded, she whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Your Grace." In her journal that night she wrote, "The house is beginning to forgive him. Perhaps he will learn to forgive himself. Perhaps I will too." She paused, staring at the ink until it dried into the page. Beneath the words, she added one line more. "There are beginnings even in grief." By the first days of March, the snow had receded from the hills, and the moors stretched brown and endless under a pale sky. The Duke of Harmsworth decided they would leave for London. The announcement came quietly over breakfast. "Lady Honoria Vale has written again," he said, setting down his cup. "She insists the children must see London for the season." His tone held no enthusiasm, but neither did it hold refusal. Isolde Merenwood looked at Henry and Sophie, who exchanged glances of mingled curiosity and excitement. "London," Sophie whispered. "Are there really lamps that burn all night?" "So they say," Isolde replied. "And carriages everywhere, and parks filled with flowers." Henry asked, "Do people stare when you pass?" "Only if you give them reason to," she said, smiling. Preparations began that very day. Servants bustled through the corridors, packing trunks and polishing silver. The once dormant Thornridge Hall hummed with movement. Isolde oversaw the children's belongings, slipping Evelyn Arden's journal carefully between her own books. The Duke moved through the house like a man uncertain whether to grieve or to hope. She often caught him pausing in doorways, as though memorizing each room before leaving it behind. On the morning of their departure, the household gathered in the entrance hall. The Duke stood beside the great doors, giving final instructions. Mrs. Doran pressed a small parcel into Isolde's hands. "Sweet biscuits for the journey," she said gruffly. "Mind the children, Miss Merenwood. London changes people." Isolde thanked her, touched by the unspoken concern. The carriages stood ready outside, their lamps gleaming. The wind carried the faint scent of thawing earth. The journey south took 3 days. They stopped at inns along the way, places warm with firelight and the smell of roasted meat. For the children, it was an adventure. For Isolde, a quiet revelation. The Duke spoke more than she had ever heard him speak before. He pointed out landmarks, told small stories of his youth, even laughed once when Sophie compared a surly innkeeper to one of Henry's toy soldiers. The sound startled them all. On the second evening, when the children had gone to bed, Isolde found the Duke in the inn's sitting room, standing by the fire with a glass of brandy. He looked less formidable in that gentle light, more a man than a title. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant, "for what you did at the ball, and afterward. I have been a poor host and worse company, yet you have managed to restore life to a place I thought beyond repair." "Thornridge only slept," she replied. "You woke it yourself." He smiled faintly. "You have a kind talent for rewriting truth." "Not rewriting," she said, "only remembering what it forgets." There was a pause, quiet but full. "When we reach London," he said at last, "you will find my sister-in-law quite unlike me. Lady Honoria has opinions about everything and tolerates few, but she is clever and kind, and the children will adore her. You may find yourself among equals there, Miss Merenwood. I am content to remain what I am," she answered softly. "A governess, a witness," she said, "to their growth, to yours." He looked at her then, and the moment lengthened until she turned away. "You should rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow we will see the city." When at last they arrived in London, the noise and brightness were almost overwhelming. Streets thronged with carriages, the clatter of wheels echoing off stone. Gas lamps burned even at midday. The air smelled of coal and rain. Lady Honoria Vale's townhouse stood in Mayfair, its white facade gleaming behind black railings. The lady herself greeted them on the steps, a tall woman in her 40s with silver-threaded hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Lucien," she exclaimed, embracing her brother-in-law, "I had nearly given up hope of ever seeing you among the living again." She turned to the children with warmth and to Isolde with frank curiosity. "And this must be the famous Miss Merenwood. I have heard much about you." "All undeserved, I assure you," Isolde replied. "We shall see," Lady Honoria said, smiling. "Come inside, all of you. The house is full of cats and opinions. Try not to be alarmed by either." Inside, the rooms were filled with light and color paintings, books, and the faint music of laughter from somewhere upstairs. The contrast to Thornridge was startling. The children explored eagerly, their voices echoing down the corridors. The Duke looked around with a strange mixture of relief and unease, like a man stepping from shadow into sunlight. That evening, they dined together in a small salon overlooking the square. Lady Honoria questioned Isolde about her teaching, her travels, her thoughts on literature. Unlike most ladies of rank, she listened as if expecting real answers. "You speak plainly," she said after a while. "It is refreshing. The capital is full of women who decorate their silences as if they were virtues." "I was not raised to be ornamental," Isolde said. "Good," Lady Honoria replied. "We have enough ornaments." After dinner, the Duke excused himself to settle correspondence, leaving Isolde and Lady Honoria alone. "You must forgive him," the older woman said. "Lucien was a better man before Evelyn's death. He is trying, though he will not admit it. And somehow you have given him back the sound of his own voice." Isolde hesitated. "I have done nothing extraordinary." "Do not be modest," Lady Honoria said, her tone kind but knowing. "My brother-in-law writes to me every week now, something he has not done since his wife died. His letters are no longer filled with silence." When Isolde retired to her room that night, she stood for a long time at the window, looking out at the city's endless lights. She could hear distant music, laughter drifting up from carriages passing below. Behind her, the fire crackled softly. She felt the weight of distant Thornridge with its frozen gardens, Evelyn's orchids, the piano's melody that had followed them here. Yet she also felt something new, fragile and bright, stirring within her like the first bloom after winter. She wrote in her journal, "The world is vast again. He smiles without meaning to. The children breathe more freely. Perhaps love does not die. It only changes its home." London in spring was a restless miracle. Carriages rattled past in a ceaseless rhythm, the scent of lilacs and smoke mingling in the air. The children thrived under the city's brightness. Henry was fascinated by everything mechanical: the omnibuses, the bridges, the printing presses visible through open shop doors. Sophie adored the parks, where she could scatter crumbs to birds and return home with her pockets full of daisies. Isolde Merenwood walked with them daily, her steps lighter than they had been in months. Yet beneath her calm, she felt an unease she could not name, a current pulling her towards something she was not sure she dared to face. The Duke was different in London. He moved with purpose, met acquaintances, attended to business at Parliament, and no longer carried the stillness of Thornridge about him like armour. He smiled more easily, though the smile was often directed at the children or Lady Honoria. Once, in the carriage after an afternoon in Hyde Park, Isolde caught his reflection in the window. He was looking not at the street, but at her. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away. One afternoon, Lady Honoria arranged a visit to the British Museum. "Education," she said, "is the surest cure for grief." The great halls were filled with marble statues and the smell of old dust. Henry darted from one exhibit to another, reading plaques aloud. Sophie clung to Isolde's hand, whispering questions about mummies and gods. The Duke lingered near the manuscripts, drawn to the quiet corner where ancient books rested behind glass. "Do you suppose," he asked, "that those who wrote these pages ever imagined they would survive this long?" Isolde considered. "Perhaps they hope to be understood by someone someday. We all want that." "Do you?" he asked softly. She met his gaze. "I think so, though being understood can be far more dangerous than being forgotten." Their conversation was interrupted by Lady Honoria, calling the children to see a newly discovered mosaic, but that brief moment lingered like a held breath. The following week they attended a small concert at a conservatory near Hanover Square. It was an evening of charity, meant to raise funds for the education of poor children. Isolde sat beside Sophie in the front row, the Duke behind them. The room glowed with candlelight and music. Halfway through the performance, a violinist began to play a haunting melody, slow, full of yearning. It was not the same as the song Isolde had once heard in Thornridge's halls, but it carried the same sorrowful beauty. Without turning, she felt the Duke's presence sharpen behind her, the weight of memory pressing upon them both. When the final note faded, he rose suddenly and left the room. She found him later in the garden, standing among the lanterns strung between budding trees. The night was mild, the scent of hyacinths heavy in the air. "Forgive me," he said when she approached. "I could not breathe in there." "It was the music," she said. "Yes, it reminded me of her, and of everything I tried to bury." His eyes lifted to hers, dark and steady. "You bring it all back, Miss Merenwood. Not the pain, the feeling of being alive enough to hurt again." He stepped closer. The lantern light caught the scar on his cheek, softening it. "You should not say such things," she murmured. "Nor should I think them, yet I do." His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "When we left Thornridge, I believed I could begin again, free of ghosts. But I find that you have become the living proof that memory can heal instead of haunt." Isolde's pulse quickened. "You forget yourself, Your Grace." "I forget everything when I am near you," he said. "For the first time in years, I am not afraid of feeling." She took a step back, though her heart betrayed her. "We must not speak of this." "No," he said. "We must not. But tell me you do not feel it too." "What good would it do, even if I did?" she whispered. "You are a duke. I am your children's governess. The world would tear us apart." "Let it," he said fiercely, then caught himself and turned away. "Forgive me." For a moment neither moved. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Father." Sophie's small figure appeared in the doorway. "Lady Honoria says the carriage is waiting." The Duke straightened, his face composed again, though his eyes were shadowed. "We are coming," he said, and walked past Isolde without another word. That night she could not sleep. The city outside was alive with distant bells and the clatter of wheels, yet her room felt utterly still. She sat by the window, the lamplight falling over her journal. "He spoke of being alive again," she wrote, "but I fear we have only woken a greater storm." She paused, then added, "I cannot love him, yet I already do." Days passed, and though propriety governed every word between them, the silence grew more dangerous than speech. He no longer sought her company, but his absence felt deliberate, as if each of them feared what would happen if they were left alone again. The children noticed the change without understanding it. "Father seems sad again," Sophie said one morning. "He is thinking," Isolde replied. "About what?" "About choosing between what the world allows and what his heart wants." A week later, at breakfast, Lady Honoria announced a new event. "A salon at my friend's house," she said. "Writers, musicians, philosophers, and people who believe themselves all three. You will come, Lucien. The world must see you live again." "And us?" Henry asked eagerly. "Not this time," she said with a smile. "But Miss Marenwood will." Isolde looked up sharply. "Me?" "Yes," Lady Honoria said. "You have spent months hiding behind lessons and duty. It is time you were seen." When the Duke said nothing, Lady Honoria added, "Surely you agree, Lucien. She deserves one evening free of responsibility." His gaze met Isolde's across the table. "Yes," he said slowly, "she deserves that and more." The evening of Lady Honoria's salon arrived with a soft drizzle that blurred the glow of London's gas lamps. Isolde Marenwood dressed with care, though her gown was simple pale blue silk trimmed with grey lace, modest but elegant. She had not worn such finery in years. When she descended the staircase, she found the Duke waiting near the entrance, fastening his gloves. He turned at the sound of her step. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. "You are ready," he said at last. "Yes, Your Grace." His gaze lingered on her face, then he looked away. "The carriage is waiting." Guff. The salon was held at Lady Fitzhugh's grand townhouse on Grosvenor Street, ablaze with candlelight and chatter. The air smelled of perfume, ink, and ambition. Poets recited lines about eternal love. Politicians murmured about progress. Lady Honoria moved through the room like a general among allies, introducing the Duke and his companions with ease. Isolde followed quietly, conscious of every curious glance. She knew what they saw: a governess in borrowed silk, an interloper among nobility, but she also knew what they did not see: the courage it took simply to stand there. She spoke politely with a composer who admired her insight on harmony, then with a lady author who lamented how society imprisoned women within courtesy. Yet her attention kept straying to the Duke, who stood across the room surrounded by admirers. He seemed at ease, even charming, but his eyes met hers again and again, each glance a silent confession. Later, when the music paused and guests began to move toward the adjoining conservatory for supper, Lady Honoria took Isolde's arm. "Go," she whispered. "Take a moment to breathe. These rooms are stifling." Isolde obeyed, stepping through the glass doors into a space filled with ferns and candlelit tables. The air was cool, fragrant with hyacinth. She wandered to the far end, where tall windows overlooked the garden. It was there the Duke found her. "You vanished," he said quietly. "Lady Honoria thought you might require air." "And you?" "I require clarity." He came closer, his expression grave. "I meant to speak with you before this evening, but I could not trust myself." "Then do not now," she said softly. "We are surrounded by eyes." "Let them see," he answered, though his voice trembled. "Isolde." It was the first time he had spoken her name. The sound of it from his lips struck her like a touch. "Please," she whispered, "do not." "I must. I have tried to silence what I feel, to bury it beneath reason, but it will not die. You have given me back my children, my home, my soul. You have made me wish to live again, and in doing so, you have undone me." Her heart beat painfully. "You owe me nothing, Your Grace. Gratitude is not love." "No," he said, "but love may begin in gratitude, just as faith begins in doubt." She turned away, trembling. "We cannot speak of this. We already are." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "When I look at you, I see the life I might have had if I had not let grief rule me. I see hope. Do you deny that you feel the same?" She pressed her hands together. "I cannot deny it," she whispered, "but I can refuse to destroy what little peace you have found." He hesitated, as though fighting himself. "If you leave, I will follow. If you stay, I will still be lost. Tell me what I must do." "You must remember who you are," she said. "A father, a leader, a man others depend on. I am none of those things. I am only a woman who has already lost too much." Before he could reply, a rustle of voices rose from the doorway. Lady Fitzhugh entered, followed by several guests. Among them was a face Isolde recognized too late, Lady Celeste Montrose. The woman's eyes widened in delighted shock. "Your Grace," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "What an unexpected tableau! How devoted your governess appears." The room stilled. The Duke's face hardened, but Celeste continued sweetly, "You are generous indeed to bring your household into society's very heart. Not all would be so progressive." Laughter flickered around the room, cruel and eager. Lady Honoria stepped forward at once. "That will do, Lady Celeste." "I beg your pardon," Celeste said innocently. "I only admire such courage." Her gaze lingered on Isolde's flushed cheeks. "Truly, your Grace has found the most instructive of companions. Comes it may." The Duke's voice cut through the whispers. "Enough." The word was quiet, but absolute. "You mistake kindness for impropriety, Lady Celeste. It is a common confusion among the unkind." He took Isolde's arm not roughly, but with unmistakable protection. "Miss Merenwood is under my care and my respect. You will remember that." He led her from the conservatory without another word. Outside, the carriage waited, rain glistening on its roof. When they were seated within, neither spoke. The city lights flickered across his face, carving shadow and sorrow in equal measure. Finally he said, "I have shamed you." "No," she answered. "You defended me." "At what cost?" "At the cost of honesty," she said, "and that is a price worth paying." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When the carriage stopped before Lady Honoria's townhouse, he turned to her. "I will not apologize for what I said, or for what I feel. Nor will I pretend not to feel it," she whispered. "But we must be wiser than our hearts." He nodded slowly. "Then we will speak no more of this until I can offer you a life unshadowed by scandal. That life may never come." "Then let the world judge me," he said, "but not tonight." He opened the carriage door and stepped into the rain, leaving her with the echo of his promise, half vow, half farewell. That night, Isolde sat awake until dawn, her hands clasped around Evelyn's old journal. The ink upon its final page had faded, but she could still read the words, "If he forgets, remind him with white orchids." She closed the book and whispered, "He remembers." Outside, the rain softened to mist. Somewhere in the sleeping city, a heart once buried in grief began to stir again. The scandal bloomed like frost overnight, creeping across every drawing room and breakfast table in London. By morning, the newspapers had their story. One column, printed with cruel precision, read, "The Duke of Harmsworth, it appears, seeks instruction beyond the nursery. His governess has educated more than the children." The words burned through the city like fire. Invitations were withdrawn. Acquaintances crossed the street to avoid greeting him. Even the servants at Lady Honoria's townhouse moved with hushed unease. Isolde Merenwood learned of the article from Lady Honoria herself, who entered her room early that morning with the paper in hand. "You must not look at it," she said, her voice hard with anger. "The words are venom, but the venom works only if you taste it." "Everyone will see," Isolde said quietly. "Everyone already has," Lady Honoria replied, "and most of them have forgotten what truth looks like." By noon, the Duke had returned from his club, his expression a mask of restrained fury. "They print what they please," he said, tossing the newspaper onto the fire. "Lies dressed as wit. I will call them to account." "You cannot," Lady Honoria warned. "To answer gossip is to feed it. You must ignore them." "I will not ignore the defamation of a woman under my care." He turned to Isolde. "This is my fault." "No," she said softly. "It is the price of your defense. I knew what would follow. You should not have to bear it. And yet I must. Come, Zant. For the first time, she saw not the Duke, but the man behind the title, helpless against the cruelty of the world he once commanded. He sat heavily in the chair by the hearth, pressing a hand to his temple. "They have written of me before," he said, "but never have I felt their words so keenly. It is not for my name that I care, it is for yours." Lady Honoria looked between them, then said quietly, "There is only one way to silence such talk." "Marriage?" Isolde asked, her voice barely audible. The lady nodded. "It will make you untouchable, but it will also end his standing among the old families. They will not forgive a union across class." The Duke met Isolde's eyes. "Let them choke on their forgiveness." "Your Grace," she began, but he interrupted, his voice steady now. "I have lived too long in silence, too long in the cage of reputation. If loving you is ruin, then ruin is a mercy." Lady Honoria rose. "Then it must be done properly. A formal announcement, a period of engagement. I will see to the arrangements. The world cannot be forced to respect love, but it can be made to respect order." When she left, the room fell into stillness. The Duke crossed to Isolde and took her hands. "You should refuse me," he said quietly. "It would be wiser." "Wisdom has never been my strongest virtue," she replied, her voice trembling. "Do you regret what you said in the carriage?" "I regret every moment before it," he answered, "and none after." He drew her gently closer. "Say the word, Isolde. Tell me you will be my wife." "You know what it will mean," she whispered. "They will never let you forget." "Let them remember," he said. "Let them remember that for once, a duke chose love over fear." Her eyes filled with tears, though her voice was steady. "Then yes, I will." He exhaled a breath that seemed to release years of grief. "Thank you," he murmured, "for teaching me to live again." Clope. Within days, the official announcement appeared in the Times. His Grace, the Duke of Harmsworth, is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Isolde Merenwood. The statement was written with restrained dignity, but the effect was anything but quiet. The city erupted. Among the progressive circles Lady Honoria frequented, it was hailed as a triumph of sentiment over snobbery. In others, it was a scandal bordering on sacrilege. For Isolde, the days that followed were a blur of whispers and scrutiny. Strangers stared openly when she walked in the park. Shopkeepers addressed her with either exaggerated deference or thinly veiled disdain. Yet amid it all, she found unexpected allies. Lord Petheridge, an old friend of the Duke's late wife, called in person to offer his congratulations. "Your courage," he said to Isolde, "reminds me of Evelyn. She too believed that the heart was worth more than inheritance." Comes. Even the children felt the city's divided gaze. One afternoon, Sophie asked, "Will people stop being cruel when you marry father?" "Some will," Isolde said. "Others will not." "Then they do not deserve to come to our house," Henry said fiercely. She smiled and ruffled his hair. "No, my dear. But we will open our doors anyway, so they may learn what kindness looks like." As the weeks passed, the noise of gossip began to dull. London's attention turned to new scandals. The Duke, though still shunned by some of his peers, walked proudly beside Isolde at every outing. When she hesitated at the threshold of a theatre one evening, afraid of the stares, he whispered, "They will look, but they will see only what we choose to show them." That night, after the performance, he took her hand as they left. "You are trembling," he said. "It is not fear," she replied. "It is wonder." "At what?" "That the world has not ended." "It has only begun," he said. Still, not everyone could bear their defiance. Lady Celeste Montrose left London for the continent, nursing her humiliation. Others followed quietly. Yet for every door that closed, another opened. Invitations from new acquaintances arrived: writers, reformers, artists who cared little for lineage and much for heart. Lady Honoria's drawing room became a gathering place for those who believed in change. One evening, as the household prepared for bed, the Duke found Isolde in the library, reading by the fire. He stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "Do you ever wish you had refused me?" She looked up from the book. "Never. Even knowing what it has cost. Especially knowing," she said, "what is love worth if it demands no courage?" He crossed to her, his expression tender. "You give me too much credit." "No," she replied, closing the book. "I give you truth." Causesby. The fire burned low, and the air was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. He said, "Tomorrow we shall visit the jeweler. My grandmother's ring has waited long enough." She reached for his hand, smiling through tears. "So have we." Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent and unstoppable. But within those walls, they had already begun to write a story that would outlast every whisper. June arrived with warmth and roses, and London glittered in celebration. The wedding of the Duke of Harmsworth to Miss Isolde Merenwood was to take place at St. George's Church in Hanover Square, a place of echoing stone and coloured light. Invitations had gone to both friends and former critics. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine affection, but all came. The morning of the wedding dawned clear. From her chamber window at Lady Honoria's townhouse, Isolde watched the sunlight touch the rooftops, gilding them in gold. Her dress hung waiting a gown of ivory silk trimmed with lace, simple and luminous. She thought of the life she had left behind, the parsonage, the years of service, the house of sorrow she had entered one winter morning. All of it had led her here, to this quiet moment before the bells began. Lady Honoria entered carrying a small bouquet of white orchids. "They arrived from Thornridge this morning," she said, "the first to bloom this year." Isolde took them reverently. "They are Evelyn's flowers." "They are yours now," Lady Honoria said gently. "A gift from the past to the future." When the carriages drew up before the church, the crowd was already gathered. People lined the steps, craning to see the woman who had turned scandal into legend. Inside, sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the aisle in ruby and sapphire light. The Duke waited at the altar, dressed in black and silver, his face calm but his eyes alive with something more than pride. As Isolde entered on her father's arm, a hush fell. She saw the children, first Henry and Sophie, standing together at the front, smiling through tears. Then she saw him. For a moment, time lost meaning. Every sorrow, every fear, every whispered doubt dissolved into the air between them. When she reached the altar, he took her hand as though he had been waiting a lifetime to do so. The vows were spoken simply, but each word felt carved from truth. "To love and to cherish from this day forward," he said, his voice steady. When she repeated the same, the sound trembled but did not falter. And when the priest declared them husband and wife, the bells began to ring clear, jubilant, carrying through the streets like a blessing long delayed. Outside, petals rained down as they emerged. The children ran ahead, laughing. Henry tugged at his father's coat. "Now you must smile all the time," he said. "That is an impossible order," Lucien replied with mock solemnity. "Then Isolde will make you," Sophie said, and the guests laughed. The wedding breakfast at Lady Honoria's townhouse was bright with music and laughter. Friends raised their glasses, and even old adversaries softened. The Duke of Devonshire offered a toast. "To love that defies expectation," he said. "May it teach the rest of us humility." Lady Honoria followed with another. "To courage the rarest form of grace." Good. When the guests had gone and the house had grown quiet, Isolde stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once judged them. The Duke came behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Are you content?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she said. "And you?" "I am alive again," he murmured. "That is contentment enough." They left London a few days later, travelling north through fields bright with summer. The children sang in the carriage. Lady Honoria waved from the doorway until they were gone. By the time they reached Thornridge Hall, twilight had settled over the moors. The house stood waiting, its windows glowing softly in welcome. The gardens had changed. Under Isolde's direction, the paths had been cleared, the fountains restored, and the conservatory repaired. When they entered it the next morning, the air was heavy with the scent of blooming orchids, white, luminous, alive. "You kept her vow," Isolde said, touching one of the blossoms. The Duke shook his head. "We kept it," he said. "Evelyn asked me to let love live here again. It has." Henry and Sophie ran between the rows of flowers, their laughter echoing off the glass. For a long while the Duke and Isolde stood watching them, hand in hand. "Do you remember," he said quietly, "when you told me that broken things could be mended?" "I do." "You were right." She smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "It was never the house that was broken, Lucien. It was us. We only needed the courage to begin again." The years that followed proved her right. Thornridge Hall became known not as a place of tragedy, but of renewal. The Duke and Duchess of Harmsworth were spoken of not for scandal, but for kindness. They established schools on the estate, restored the chapel, and held summer fetes for the tenants. The children grew tall and strong, their laughter filling every corner of the house that had once held only silence. One winter evening, long after the lamps had been lit, Isolde sat beside the fire in the library. The Duke entered quietly, a small bundle in his arms, a newborn son barely a week old. "He sleeps," Lucien whispered, lowering himself beside her. She gazed at the child's tiny face. "Edward," she said softly. "He looks like you." "He looks like us," he corrected. "He belongs to both our worlds." They sat together, the firelight warm on their faces. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and unhurried. Through the window, the conservatory glowed faintly, 1,000 orchids blooming against the dark. Years later, when the Duke and Duchess were old and the children grown, Thornridge still thrived. Visitors often spoke of the peace that lingered there, the sense of something good that had once been nearly lost and found again. And in the great hall, beneath the portrait of Evelyn Arden, another painting hung a likeness of Isolde, serene and strong, her eyes lifted toward light. Beneath it, a simple inscription read, "To my heart's peace, now and forever." On quiet mornings, the servants swore they could still hear faint music from the west wing, a melody played with tenderness and memory. Perhaps it was only wind through the corridors, or perhaps it was love keeping its promise. Either way, no one feared it. For love, once forgotten, had been remembered, the vow had been kept.